December 15th, 1995. A cold, quiet evening near Castellandinas, a historic hill fort close to Newquay, Cornwall. But at 6:30 p.m., everything changed. Mark Wade, a 31-year-old truck driver from Fren, had been behind the wheel since early morning. Exhaustion clung to him like a heavy weight as he made his way back to his company's depot in St. Column. His cargo? A Caterpillar digger, strapped onto a low-loader lorry. A routine haul, a job he had done before. But what he didn't know was that a single mistake had already sealed the fate of 5 innocent people. The digger's arm, a massive hunk of steel meant to be locked in place, wasn't secured properly. Maybe he thought it was stable. Maybe he was too tired to double-check. Either way, it was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Wade navigated the narrow B road, the unfastened arm began to swing, silent, deadly, unnoticed. And then, in an instant, it veered into the opposite lane. 4 cars were approaching. There was no time to react. The digger's arm tore through the cars like a blade through paper. Glass exploded into the air. Screeching tires, shattered bodies. 5 lives were lost in an instant. The survivors were left with horrific injuries, their lives forever altered. Emergency services rushed in. 10 ambulance crews, firefighters, police officers. They fought through the wreckage, searching for any signs of life, pulling bodies from mangled vehicles, trying to make sense of the destruction. But for 5 souls, there was nothing anyone could do. As the smoke settled, the investigation began. How had this happened? Why had the digger's arm been loose? The truth was chilling in its simplicity. It should have been locked with a metal pin and chains. The equipment was there. The instructions were clear. But Wade hadn't used them. And what made it worse? He had never been trained properly. His employers, Basely Plant Hire and Chepto Plant Hire, had never ensured he knew how to transport heavy machinery safely. Their negligence cost 5 people their lives. The court saw the failure for what it was. The companies were fined £500,000 for disregarding safety. But what about Wade? He wasn't a criminal. He was a man burdened with guilt so crushing it consumed him. The weight of that night never left him. He didn't fight his fate, didn't try to defend himself. When the psychiatric reports came in, the truth was undeniable. He was not the same man who had started that drive. PTSD, depression. The horrors of that night had broken him. The community saw it too. Over 1,000 people signed a petition pleading for mercy, arguing that no prison sentence could be worse than the punishment he was already serving in his mind. The judge agreed. No jail cell could hold him tighter than his own guilt. Instead, Wade was sent to a psychiatric hospital, left to live with the ghosts of that December night. For the victims' families, justice was a hollow word. Their loved ones weren't coming back. The pain, the grief, the questions, none of it would ever fade. But they weren't the only ones who suffered. Richard Bobk, a firefighter from St. Column Major Fire Station, had been one of the first on the scene. He had seen the wreckage, the bodies, the devastation, and it changed him. Richard was a father, a man who loved his daughters, Selena and Anna, more than anything, but the trauma dug into him, deeper and deeper, until he couldn't escape it. No one talked about PTSD back then. No one saw the silent wounds it left. 8 months later, the weight of it all became too much. Richard was gone. His daughters were left with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. Selena later spoke about how her father's loss reshaped their lives, how the years they should have had together were stolen by something no one could see. Years later, his name was finally honored. A plaque at St. Column's Fire Station, a place on the National Fire Brigade Memorial in London. His fellow firefighters gathered to remember him, not just for the tragedy he endured, but for the man he had been before that night. By June 1967, Jane Mansfield's Hollywood glow had dimmed, but her reputation as a blonde bombshell with a flair for the dramatic was still intact. Known for her provocative roles and larger-than-life personality, Jane's life took a heartbreaking turn on June 29th, when she tragically died in a car accident, a mystery-laden event that soon became the stuff of urban legends. Jane, born Vera Jane Palmer on April 19, 1933, In Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, always dreamed big. At 17, she married Paul Mansfield and later made the leap to Hollywood to chase her acting dreams. Smart and savvy, Jane figured out how to turn heads. She became one of the first Playboy bunnies and made history as Playboy's Playmate of the Month in February 1955. Whether she was daringly exposing herself in public or becoming the first actress to appear nude on screen in Promises, 1963, Jane mastered the art of staying in the spotlight. Her off-screen life was just as bold: Pink Mansion, a pack of chihuahuas, and a rivalry with Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn's untimely death in 1962 deeply shook Jane, prompting her to eerily predict, "Maybe I'll be next." Sadly, her words proved hauntingly accurate. After a nightclub performance in Biloxi, Mississippi on June 29, 1967, Jane hit the road for a TV gig in New Orleans. With her career pivoting to nightclub acts and smaller appearances, travel was a constant. She set off in a 1966 Buick Electra 225 with her boyfriend, Sam Brody, her driver, Ronnie Harrison, 3 of her children snoozing in the back seat, and her 4 chihuahuas along for the ride. The journey started uneventfully, cruising through the Gulf Coast's summer night air. After a quick stop at a 24-hour diner near the Mississippi-Louisiana state line, things took a dangerous turn. A dense mist settled over the swampy Highway 90, combining with insecticide spray from a mosquito fogging truck to create an eerie, blinding fog. Barreling through at 80 miles per hour, the Buick didn't see the slow-moving 18-wheeler ahead. The car slammed into the truck's rear, shearing off its roof and leaving the front mangled. Jane, Sam, and Ronnie, seated in the front, were killed instantly, while her children in the back miraculously survived. Speculation exploded when photos of the crash showed Jane's blonde wig hanging from the windshield, sparking rumors that she had been decapitated. However, the coroner confirmed that while her injuries were severe, scalping and skull trauma, her head was not severed. As if the story weren't bizarre enough, Jane's connection to Church of Satan, founder Anton LaVey, added fuel to the fire. Rumor had it LaVey cursed Brody, predicting his death in a car crash. This tale gained even more traction with the 2017 documentary Mansfield 6667. Jane's tragic death left a lasting legacy, not just in Hollywood but also in car safety. The horrific crash led to the introduction of Mansfield bars, underride guards on semi-truck trailers designed to prevent cars from sliding underneath during collisions. In Life and Death, Jane Mansfield was unforgettable, leaving behind a legacy as dramatic and impactful as her career. On the night of July 18, 1969, off Martha's Vineyard, an event involving Senator Edward "Ted" Kennedy would shake the nation, changing his career and his life forever. At just 37, Kennedy was a rising political star, the youngest of the Kennedy brothers, with a powerful legacy to uphold. His brothers, President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy, had both tragically been assassinated, and Ted was seen as a key figure in the Senate, even a potential presidential candidate in 1972. But that night would alter his path. After participating in a boat race near the island, Kennedy attended a party with friends and political figures, including Mary Jo Kopechne, a 28-year-old secretary with a promising future. Around 11 p.m., Kennedy left the party with Mary Jo, claiming he was giving her a ride back to her hotel. However, she had left her handbag and room key behind, casting doubt on his explanation. At midnight, Kennedy's car was spotted speeding down an unpaved road near Chappaquiddick. As the car neared a small bridge, Kennedy lost control, and the vehicle plunged into a tidal pond, landing upside down. Kennedy managed to escape, but Mary Jo was trapped inside the submerged car. Instead of immediately seeking help, Kennedy walked back to the party and confided in his cousin and friend, but no one contacted authorities. He then swam to Edgartown, where he changed into dry clothes. The next morning, he was seen calmly walking around the hotel. It wasn't until late morning that he finally reported the incident, by which time the car had been discovered and Mary Jo's body recovered. The delayed response and Kennedy's actions raised questions that have lingered ever since. Why didn't he act immediately? Could Mary Jo have been saved? Why did he wait so long to report the accident? The investigation was brief, and Kennedy's televised statement offered no new clarity. He claimed he was overwhelmed with panic and grief, but many wondered if his primary concern was protecting his political future. Speculation swirled. Rumors that Mary Jo might have been pregnant surfaced, but were never substantiated. Some believed she could have survived in an air pocket in the car for hours if help had arrived sooner. Kennedy's friends described him as deeply shaken in the days that followed, with his wife suffering a miscarriage and his father's health worsening from the stress of the scandal. Legally, Kennedy faced little consequence. He pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident and received a 2-month suspended sentence. But politically, the damage was done. The incident forever marred his reputation and dashed any hopes of running for president. While Kennedy would go on to serve in the Senate for decades, respected for his legislative work, the questions surrounding Chappaquiddick remained unanswered. Mary Jo Kopechne's story, overshadowed by the political fallout, ended in mystery. The details of that night, the unanswered questions, the possibility of a different outcome, still haunt those who lived through it. Could it have turned out differently if Kennedy had acted faster? The Chappaquiddick incident remains one of the most debated moments in American political history, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions that continue to echo to this day. On the fateful morning of August 5, 2022, the quiet, sun-drenched streets of Mar Vista, Los Angeles, became the backdrop for a chilling incident that would forever alter the life of actress Anne Hessa. Known for her memorable roles in films like Volcano and I Know What You Did Last Summer, Anne was no stranger to the spotlight. But on this day, her life took an unexpected and tragic turn. Cruising through the neighborhood in her Mini Cooper, she was reportedly driving at an astonishing 80 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour zone, far faster than anyone could have anticipated. At exactly 11:01 a.m., her car lost control, veering off the road and crashing violently into a home on Walgrove Avenue. The impact was catastrophic. Within moments, the car exploded in flames, consuming both the vehicle and the house in a blaze so fierce it seemed unstoppable. Anne was trapped inside the wreckage, unable to escape the inferno that raged around her. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but the fire was relentless, taking more than 30 minutes to contain. When they finally reached her, the damage was already done. Anne had inhaled toxic amounts of smoke and suffered life-threatening injuries. She was rushed to the hospital and later transferred to the Grossman Burn Center in West Hills, where doctors fought desperately to save her. But the burns were severe. Second-degree burns covering 12% of her body, first-degree burns on 40%, and a fractured sternum. Despite intense medical efforts, including skin grafts, Anne never regained consciousness. The next 6 days were a blur of grief and uncertainty for her family. On August 11th, just 6 days after the crash, Anne was declared brain dead, legally meeting the definition of death in California. Her family, honoring her wish to be an organ donor, made the heartbreaking decision to let her go. Through the One Legacy Foundation, her organs were donated, a final act of generosity that she had always intended. Her eldest son, Homer, shared his sorrow with the world. My brother Atlas and I lost our mom after 6 days of almost unbearable emotional swings. I am left with a deep sadness. Hopefully, my mom is free from pain now. The tragic death of Anne Hessa reverberated through Hollywood, leaving a void that would be felt for years to come. Friends, colleagues, and fans mourned her loss. Former partner Ellen DeGeneres tweeted her condolences, and actress Patricia Arquette described Anne as wildly talented, someone who had endured unimaginable struggles. Despite a toxicology report revealing traces of substances in her system, it was confirmed that these were pain-relieving medications administered during her hospitalization, not drugs of her own doing. The coroner's office ultimately ruled her death an accident, caused by the combination of inhalation injuries, thermal burns, and a fractured sternum. and Hessa's untimely passing was not just a personal tragedy. It was also a lesson for us about the fragile nature of life. Her legacy, shaped by both her immense talent and her tumultuous personal struggles, shows us how quickly life can change. The devastating crash in Mar Vista forever altered the trajectory of a career that had been filled with promise, leaving behind a trail of grief and unfinished potential. Through the tragedy, Anne's story stands as a testament to the unpredictable nature of life itself, how it can shift in an instant, leaving us to wonder what could have been. It was a quiet evening in November 2024, the kind where the hum of passing cars blends into the background, where the road feels predictable, safe. But on the RM12 motorway in La Manga, Spain, the ordinary was about to shatter in the most horrifying way. A group of British men, likely looking forward to a relaxing trip, never saw it coming. A speeding vehicle, towing something massive, rushed down the highway. The cargo? A 32-foot speedboat, one of the infamous narco lanchas often used in smuggling, built for one thing: speed. With its powerful twin 300-horsepower engines, it was a machine meant to cut through ocean waves undetected. But that night, it became something far deadlier. Without warning, the boat broke free. It didn't just slip off, it launched. At a staggering speed of 120 kilometers per hour, the massive vessel turned into a flying battering ram, slicing through the air before coming down with devastating force, right on top of a Seat Leon. Inside were 3 British men. The driver and front seat passenger, aged 49 and 57, never stood a chance. The impact was immediate, brutal. Their lives were gone in an instant. The third man, 54 years old, sat in the back. He survived, but just barely. Critical injuries left him fighting for his life as emergency responders worked desperately to save him. But the destruction didn't stop there. The sheer force of the crash set off a chain reaction. The motorway became a scene of chaos. 6 more vehicles caught in the mayhem, cars skidding off the road, some overturned, others crushed beyond recognition. Twisted metal, shattered glass. A highway turned into a war zone. Rescue teams fought against time, working for over 30 minutes to free those trapped in the wreckage. The injured, including 2 women and 2 men, were rushed to hospitals, their conditions uncertain. Then came the questions and the fear. This wasn't just some freak accident. The boat wasn't an ordinary vessel. It was built for smugglers, designed to outrun police on open water, and the person responsible for towing it, gone, fled the scene before authorities arrived. Was it an accident? Or was it something more sinister? Investigators moved quickly, sifting through the wreckage, searching for answers. Among the twisted debris, they found something: a set of supermarket receipts. A small clue, but perhaps enough. Authorities pulled security footage from nearby stores, hoping to identify the driver, to track down whoever had let this deadly machine loose. Meanwhile, the victims' identities were confirmed. British nationals, their car packed with golf clubs, likely on their way to the famed La Manga Golf and Tennis Resort. A trip that should have been nothing more than a relaxing getaway had ended in unthinkable tragedy. Photos from the scene showed the horrifying aftermath. The speedboat still lying across the motorway, wreckage all around it. The damage told the story: a massive projectile, a moment of chaos, lives stolen in an instant. And yet, the biggest mystery remained. Where was the driver? The boat itself offered no answers. A Zodiac inflatable, no visible registration numbers, its origins unclear. Was it being transported for innocent reasons? Or had it been part of something much larger, something criminal? Officials, now working with the British Embassy, dug deeper, looking for any trace of where it had come from and how this disaster had been set in motion. Beyond the loss of life, the crash sent shockwaves through the region. The RM12, a major road connecting La Manga and Cartagena, was shut down for hours. Traffic backed up for miles. People who had planned nothing more than a quiet evening found themselves trapped in the aftermath of a nightmare. And still, the questions remain. How could something this large, this dangerous, have been so poorly secured? Was this truly a case of negligence, Or was there more to the story? And most hauntingly of all, what happened to the person who left this devastation behind? The search for answers continues, but for the families left grieving, no answer will ever be enough. One moment of recklessness, or something far worse, turned an ordinary night into a catastrophe. And for those who survived, the memory of that night will never fade. On September 30th, 1955, the world lost one of its brightest stars, but it was a day that started like any other for James Dean, Hollywood's heartthrob. At just 24, Dean had already earned the title of the Rebel Without a Cause and was living life at full throttle, both on and off the screen. That day, he was cruising along the highway in his Porsche 550 Spider, a sleek silver bullet of a car he'd lovingly dubbed Little Bastard. With his signature smoldering looks, a career that seemed destined for greatness, and a love of speed that matched his star power, it looked like Dean's meteoric rise would last forever. But, as it often does with passionate souls, fate had other plans. Born James Byron Dean on February 8, 1931, in Marion, Indiana, Jimmy wasn't one to sit still. Even as a young boy, he exuded that unmistakable spark, that raw energy that later made him an icon. After moving to California and studying drama at UCLA, his natural talent quickly got him noticed by Hollywood's elite. He landed small roles in TV shows and films, but it was his breakout performance in East of Eden that catapulted him to superstardom. With his melancholic eyes and rebellious edge, Dean captured the hearts of audiences across the world. His next big role in Rebel Without a Cause solidified his status as a cultural phenomenon, and the world watched as his career soared. But Jimmy wasn't just a movie star, he was a race car enthusiast. In fact, racing was his greatest passion outside of acting. Though his popularity in Hollywood was skyrocketing, it wasn't enough to satisfy the itch he had for speed. Dean dreamed of one day competing in the legendary Indianapolis 500, and his acting success gave him the freedom to indulge in his racing hobby. First came a Triumph Tiger motorcycle, then a Porsche 356 Speedster. Both choices were fast, but Dean had an unrelenting need for even more speed. That's when he got his hands on a Porsche 550 Spider. The car was a sleek, aerodynamic masterpiece, perfect for a man who craved thrills. Dean's affection for the car was so intense that he gave it the nickname Little Bastard, a name that would go on to take on a chilling significance. By the end of September 1955, Dean had wrapped up filming Giant and was itching to get back behind the wheel. He decided to take Little Bastard out for a spin, accompanied by his mechanic, Rolf Wütherich. The original plan was for the car to be towed to a race in Salinas, but Wütherich suggested Dean take it for a test drive just to feel out the ride. Dean, never one to shy away from a little adventure, agreed. Along with stunt driver Bill Hickman and photographer Sanford H. Roth, they hit the road at around 3:30 p.m., making a pit stop for gas shortly after. By 5:15, they were back on the road, heading west. As they neared the junction of what is now State Routes 46 and 41, fate took an awful turn. A 1950 Ford Tudor, driven by 23-year-old Donald Turnipseed, turned left directly into the path of the oncoming Porsche. Dean, with his racing instincts kicking in, tried to swerve to avoid a collision, but in a split second, the two cars collided head-on. The impact sent Little Bastard careening off the road and into a ditch. The aftermath was nothing short of heartbreaking. When help arrived at the scene, Dean was unconscious and severely injured, suffering from a broken neck and crushed legs. Wütherich, who had been thrown from the car, survived but with significant injuries. Turnipseed, however, walked away with only a few scratches, a twist of fate that haunted him for the rest of his life. Tragically, despite the best efforts of paramedics, James Dean was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. on the same day, leaving the world in shock and Hollywood mourning the loss of one of its brightest stars. Less than a month later, Dean's iconic film Rebel Without a Cause hit theaters, forever cementing his place in the annals of Hollywood history. The film's themes of youthful angst and rebellion struck a chord with a generation, and Dean's portrayal of Jim Stark became the defining image of teenage rebellion. But more than his film roles, It was his untimely death that sealed his status as a tragic legend. Dean had lived fast, loved fiercely, and left the world far too soon. His tragic demise, like a flame burning out before its time, made him a symbol of all that is fleeting in youth. On June 11, 2023, a terrible accident struck the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales, Australia. What began as a joyful wedding celebration ended in an unimaginable tragedy. The night was filled with laughter and dancing as guests gathered at Wandon Valley Estate to celebrate the wedding of Mitchell Gaffney and Malene Edsel. 35 people climbed aboard the bus, their hearts still full from the night's celebrations. The vehicle, a 2009 Volvo B7R operated by Link Bus Lines, rumbled to life, its headlights cutting through the thick night air. Among the passengers were couples, friends, and members of the Singleton Roosters Australian Rules Football Club, people who had their entire futures ahead of them. But at 11:30 p.m., as the bus neared a roundabout at the M15 Wine Country Drive interchange near Greta, the night took a horrifying turn. Thick fog obstructed the vision, but the driver, 58-year-old Brett Button, pressed on. Then, in an instant, he lost control. The vehicle tipped violently, rolling onto its side with a sickening crash. The devastation was unimaginable. 10 people never made it out alive. Among them were 22-year-old Kea McBride and her mother, 52-year-old Nadine McBride. Kane Simons, just 21 years old, was gone. Zachary Bray, 29th Angus Craig, Tori Coburn, Rebecca Mullen, names that would later be etched into headlines, into the hearts of their loved ones. Darcy Bowman, Andrew and Lynn Scott, all in their 30s, their futures stolen in an instant. Survivors stumbled from the wreckage, some barely able to stand, others too injured to move. 25 people suffered agonizing wounds, and one critically injured passenger was airlifted to Sydney in a desperate bid to save their life. News of the crash tore through the country, leaving a nation in mourning. Emergency crews worked through the night, their faces grim as they pulled bodies from the wreckage. The horror of what had happened began to unfold, and authorities scrambled to find answers. Brett Button, the man behind the wheel, was arrested at the scene. Investigators soon discovered a chilling truth. He had taken tramadol, a powerful painkiller, within the last 24 hours. The dosage was dangerously high, far beyond what was safe. His medical history painted an even darker picture. Chronic pain had plagued him since the 1990s, and for decades he had relied on tramadol to function. But the dependency had cost him. In 2022, a doctor had flagged his addiction, and he was removed from a previous job. Yet, somehow, he continued to work as a driver. Somehow, he was still trusted with the lives of others. As the investigation continued, a painful reality became clear. Button had been speeding when he approached that roundabout. The fog was thick, but he didn't slow down. The people on that bus had no idea their fate rested in the hands of a man who should never have been behind the wheel that night. Grief turned into anger. Families shattered by the crash wanted justice, but when Button was initially charged with 10 counts of dangerous driving, causing death, and negligent driving, it felt like too little. Then, in January 2024, the stakes rose. He was charged with manslaughter. The victim's loved ones clung to the hope that true justice would be served, but hope can be cruel. In a later plea deal, the manslaughter charges were dropped. The legal system decided it was not murder, it was negligence. Button pleaded guilty to dangerous driving causing death and related offenses, but the outrage remained. By September 2024, the verdict was in. Brett Button was sentenced to 32 years in prison, with no chance of parole for 24 years. For some, it was a relief. For others, it wasn't enough. The decision to drop the manslaughter charges felt like an insult to the lives taken. The weight of the tragedy was immeasurable, and no sentence could bring back the loved ones who had been stolen that night. In the aftermath, a wave of support poured in. The Hunter Valley Bus Tragedy Fund, managed by Rotary, raised nearly $1.5 million to help the victims' families. Strangers from across Australia donated, their hearts breaking for those left behind. Bessie Smith, the legendary Empress of the Blues, was a true powerhouse of the jazz age, commanding stages with her soul-stirring voice and unshakable presence. But her life came to a shocking end in a tragic car accident, sparking rumors and controversies that still linger. Born on April 15, 1894, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Bessie had a tough start in life. Orphaned young, she and her 6 siblings had to scrape by, performing on street corners for pennies. But even then, her talent shone bright. She later joined a traveling troupe led by blues icon Ma Rainey, who helped Bessie craft her unforgettable stage persona. By the 1920s, Bessie was a star. Signing with Columbia Records in 1923, she became the most popular female blues singer of her era, belting out hits that captivated audiences nationwide. But when the Great Depression hit, her fame began to fade. She took her act on the road, playing smaller gigs in clubs and theaters across the country. It was during one of these trips, on September 26, 1937, that tragedy struck. Bessie and her partner, Richard Morgan, were driving along U.S. Route 61 between Memphis and Clarksdale when things took a deadly turn. Around 2 a.m., Richard tried to overtake a slow-moving truck but misjudged its speed, leading to a devastating collision. The car's roof was ripped off, and Bessie suffered horrific injuries, including a nearly severed right arm and severe trauma to her right side. While Richard walked away unscathed, Bessie was left critically injured in the road. A surgeon, Dr. Hugh Smith, happened upon the scene and did his best to stabilize her, using a handkerchief to dress her wounded arm. As if things couldn't get worse, another car barreled into Dr. Smith's parked vehicle, narrowly missing Bessie. 2 ambulances eventually arrived, one from a black hospital and another from a whites-only hospital, thanks to the segregation laws of the Deep South. Bessie was taken to Clarksdale's G.T. Thomas Afro-American Hospital, where her arm was amputated. Tragically, she never regained consciousness and passed away that morning. Rumors soon flew. Some claimed Bessie died after being denied treatment at a whites-only hospital, a myth perpetuated by jazz writer John Hammond and later immortalized in Edward Albee's 1959 play, The Death of Bessie Smith. Dr. Hugh Smith debunked this, explaining no hospital in the area would have transported a black patient to a whites-only facility at the time. Bessie was laid to rest in Philadelphia on October 4, 1937, with thousands mourning the loss of the blues queen. Heartbreakingly, her grave remained unmarked for decades, partly due to her estranged husband, Jack G., blocking efforts to place a headstone. Finally, in 1970, thanks to singer Janis Joplin and Bessie's friend Juanita Green, a tombstone was erected, giving the Empress of the Blues the recognition she so deserved. It was February 13, 2024, in Mesa, Arizona. Ray Longi, a 67-year-old father, grandfather, and devoted aviation enthusiast, was on his way to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport to pick up his wife. Ray had always loved planes, so much so that his family joked he could recognize an aircraft just by the sound of its engine. Living near Falcon Field Airport, he spent years watching planes take off and land, fascinated by the miracle of flight. But on this night, Ray would never make it to the airport. As he cruised down Greenfield Road in his red Lexus, a private jet began its takeoff just a short distance away. The sleek business aircraft roared down the runway, its engines screaming in the night. Then, something went terribly wrong. The plane struggled, failing to lift off. It veered off course, hurtling toward the road, toward Ray. The impact was devastating. In an instant, the jet slammed into his car, crumpling the vehicle like paper. Flames erupted. The jet skidded wildly, finally coming to a stop in a nearby orchard, engulfed in fire. Inside were 4 passengers: Drew Kimball, his 12-year-old son Grom, Spencer Lindell, and Rustin Randall. None of them survived. A teenage passenger managed to escape but suffered severe burns. The shock spread like wildfire. Witnesses described the horrifying scene. The plane never even left the ground before it turned into a deadly missile. And Ray, he had been just blocks from his home, just minutes from safety. His daughter, Lorraine, couldn't believe it. "When I heard there was an accident, I assumed it was a car crash," she said. "When I found out a plane was involved, I couldn't believe it. My dad lived next to that airport for years. How could this happen?" Ray wasn't just a man who loved planes. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather. He spent his days with his wife, his children, and his 1-year-old grandson, Charles. He was the kind of man who never missed a chance to check in on his loved ones. Minutes before the crash, he had sent Lorraine a simple text. "Everything okay?" It was the kind of message he always sent. A small but powerful reminder of his love. Now, it was one of the last things he ever said to her. The grief was unbearable. The man who had spent his life admiring planes had been taken by one. It was cruel, unfair. But Lorraine knew one thing. Her father wouldn't want them to drown in sorrow. "He'd want us to keep going," she whispered. Ray had spent his life helping others. He had supported Sunshine Acres Children's Home, donating during the holidays to bring joy to those in need. Now, his family encouraged others to continue his kindness, to give in his memory. For Ray's family, the answer wouldn't bring him back. But knowing the truth, that was the only way to move forward. November 30th, 2013 started off as a pretty chill day for Paul Walker. The 40-year-old actor, best known as Brian O'Connor from the Fast and Furious franchise, was hanging out with his mom and 15-year-old daughter, Meadow. They were casually chatting about Christmas tree shopping when Paul suddenly got a reminder about an event he needed to attend. In a rush, he left, completely unaware that this day would tragically change everything and shock fans around the world. Paul William Walker IV was born on September 12, 1973, in Glendale, California, practically destined for stardom. With a model mom and an amateur boxer dad, Paul grew up surrounded by the glitz and grit of showbiz. He was already stealing the spotlight at the age of 2 in a Pampers commercial. From TV roles in shows like Highway to Heaven and Charles in Charge, to starring in 90s hits like Pleasantville and She's All That, Paul was on a steady rise. But it was his role as undercover cop Brian O'Connor in The Fast and the Furious, 2001, that turned him into a Hollywood A-lister and a fan favorite. Beyond acting, Paul had 3 great loves: cars, racing, and charity work. Unfortunately, it was this very trio that led to his untimely death. On that fateful day, Paul attended a charity event hosted by his nonprofit, Reach Out Worldwide, at a car shop he co-owned with his friend Roger Rodas, a former race car driver. After the event, the duo decided to take a quick spin in a 2005 Porsche Carrera GT, a beast of a sports car, but notoriously hard to handle. At around 3:30 p.m., with Roger behind the wheel and Paul in the passenger seat, they sped off. The car, estimated to be traveling at 100 miles per hour, spun out of control, hitting a curb, a tree, and a light post before slamming into another tree and bursting into flames. Onlookers from the charity rushed to help, but the fiery wreck was too intense to approach. Tragically, both men were pronounced dead at the scene, with Paul's cause of death determined to be a combination of traumatic injuries and burns. The investigation later revealed that the car's excessive speed and the age of its tires were the primary causes of the crash. No drugs or alcohol were involved, but the loss of Paul sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Fans and co-stars alike mourned the man they admired, not just for his on-screen charisma, but for his off-screen kindness. Paul's daughter, Meadow, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Porsche, alleging design flaws in the Carrera GT contributed to the crash. Porsche countered that the car had been altered and misused, but the lawsuit was eventually settled confidentially. At the time of his death, Paul was in the middle of filming Furious 7, which left the production team scrambling. After consulting with Paul's family, his brother Cody stepped in to help complete Paul's remaining scenes, with a little help from CGI to give fans a heartfelt tribute. The crash site in Santa Clarita soon became a shrine, as fans from around the globe left flowers, notes, and mementos for the beloved actor. Though Paul Walker's life was cut tragically short, his legacy of kindness, talent, and passion for fast cars lives on, both on screen and in the hearts of millions.